We are your hosts, Nikki Shore and Jesse Swain, and you are listening to the American Journal of Infection Control podcast, Science into Practice, brought to you by the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology to highlight work published in our peer-reviewed journal, APIC.
Join us as we speak to those in the field of infection prevention and control, like us, as well as other experts, to learn about some of the latest research in the field and how it can be put into practice. We hope you will listen in, learn something new, and apply this information to your work. If you are not a researcher already, we hope this podcast will get you thinking about areas where you can carry out your own research.
Welcome back to APIC, Science into Practice, the podcast where the scopes are flexible, but the standards, not so much. I am Nikki, infection preventionist and part-time endoscope whisperer.
And I'm Jess. Today, we're diving into the murky, sudsy waters of endoscope reprocessing because nothing says good morning like a detailed debate over bristle stiffness.
Yes. And to guide us through this sterilization safari is Frankie Catalfumo. He is an MPH. He's a CIC. He's a CRCST. He is the director of practice guidance and health equity at APIC, where he leads research, guidance development, and critical work connecting infection prevention to health equity.
Before that, he lent his infection prevention chops to places like Inova Health, Johns Hopkins, and the Department of Defense, and the CDC. Basically, if infection prevention were a sport, Frankie would already be in the Hall of Fame.
Frankie, welcome to the show. We are thrilled to have you, and you're going to talk to us today about your article, Acknowledging the Gaps in Endoscope Reprocessing, a call for research to inform real-world practice.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for the invite specifically to highlight all the gaps in endoscope reprocessing, because if you're an IP out there scratching your head about a particular question, maybe there's no good answer, and we're going to tell you more about that.
That's awesome. You've come so far.
You have, yeah. Let's get those gaps going. We'll talk about manual cleaning first. So let's start where every good reprocessing story begins, the manual cleaning. So you mentioned in your article that brush selection is often left up to the facility. And I feel like that seems a little risky. It's kind of like I have a toddler at home, and it feels like I'd be giving her her choice of power tools. So can you walk us through why brush selection matters so much and what risks we're taking when the IFUs don't really specify details like bristle type?
Absolutely. And I can kind of summarize this even in one sentence, and I will go ahead and explain more. But if it's not clean, you can't disinfect it, you cannot sterilize it. So what we do know about brushes is if bioburden is not properly removed using those bristles, you can't disinfect it, you can't sterilize it, and it can't have contact with all those surfaces of the endoscope to destroy all those microorganisms or certain bacterial spores on surfaces if we end up with a sterilization piece. So when we look at these brushes, you can use the incorrect tool because there could be inadequate cleaning. You could have the brush not actually have full contact with the channel. It could be a little bit too rigid and actually cause more abrasions in the actual channel itself, opening up to those microorganisms. And it's really bad that we don't have more details to help us actually execute it. I feel like IFU should be very similar to baking. We should have very specific steps and how to achieve what we need to achieve. So that way it's reproducible across every single end user who's doing that reprocessing.
Yeah, MIFUs are all over the place. I actually just got a micro credentialing in MIFUs. Just FYI, that's out there.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, if I'm a new infection preventionist trying to write or audit a policy, what would be your advice when the IFU says use an appropriate brush, but doesn't tell me what that actually means?
Follow up with your manufacturer immediately. And the best thing, and I always tell all IPs this, get information that your manufacturer shares with you on that letterhead. So that way you have something to prove if you've done a risk assessment. If you are in the midst of a survey, you could say, here's what I have from the manufacturer. It's signed and everything. If they're not willing to put it on letterhead, that should be a huge red flag for you that you are in the midst of shenanigans and you need to actually apply more pressure, maybe even contact a few people through IP chat on the APIC.org website, which I think is fabulous. The chat room that I drop into all the time just to see what's going on and just see what other people are out there doing with that specific endoscope and exactly what is the direction you should go in. But always, always, always get it on letterhead, get a copy, archive that, laminate it, put it in a safe, whatever you need to do to keep it safe at your facility for a long time.
That is great advice, really. It is, because you may want to look into talking to a new vendor if they can't or are unwilling to provide that.
Or if they're, if there's shenanigans at play. I love that you use that word.
There's shenaniganing.
Right? So let's talk about drying. So apparently if your scope's not dry, it's not clean, it's just damp and dangerous. And you mentioned that moisture is basically a VIP invitation for microbes to settle in and party. Can you explain what the risks are when the drying is skipped or rushed?
I absolutely love that. It is a VIP invitation for a microbe party. And what we do know is that water is super essential for microorganisms, and it's underscoring the importance of that removal process, getting all that residual fluid out to prevent any microbial growth or proliferation. And then ideally that development of biofilms, which gives a lot of us that high blood pressure as soon as we walk into endoscopy and we think about all this residual bioburden or residual water and how it could go ahead and promote the development of biofilm. So when we think about the drying, we need dry air to remove all those remaining fluids, all that remaining moisture. It needs to go past that alcohol flush in your AER. And we need to do that so that way it's sufficiently dried and those microorganisms won't remain in that channel and then ideally reproduce during storage. If we were able to see all those microorganisms like bugs, cockroaches, and spiders, we would absolutely be alarmed. But because we can't, I would say as an IP, we're paid to be paranoid. And this is absolutely a step that I'm paranoid about is that residual water.
It's like me. I just literally walked down the hallway here at work and there was a spider on the floor. And I think that the person in the break room heard me audibly scream. So I was like, ah!
Now, if only every
And there's no
infection
such thing as
prevention
a sterile
finding.
spider. It's kind of, this isn't a BYOB party, like bring your own biofilm. We need you out of here. So, once you've convinced us drying matters, but what about the how? So what's the current best practice for drying thoroughly? And what do you hope future research will clarify?
Yeah, and this part gets a little messy, and we do know that research is helping us clarify exactly what we need to be successful. Like I said, we want something very similar to baking where it says A plus B plus C plus D equals great result, and it's reproducible. And the first thing I always say is depending on what kind of standards or guidelines your facility follows, either AMI or AORN, when we look at specifically AMI and AORN, they recommend a minimum of 10 minutes of using pressurized instrument air or HEPA filtered air with a certain pounds per square inch PSI by the manufacturer to dry that internal channel. And really, we're trying to push all that residual water out with that. So that's the latest and greatest research we do have. But I do want to say APIC released an issue brief on endoscope reprocessing. And there is a really nifty table on page 24 that does compare all of the key steps based on the standards and guidelines. So if you did want to look at drying just to see how everything differs across those guidelines and standards, take a peek at that table and then just see maybe where you're at. If you're an AMI house, look all the way through. If you're an AORN house, look all the way through and just see how everything compares and maybe see if you're in full alignment with what house you think you are.
Yeah, and I wanted to comment, you say reprocessing is like baking, and if you skip a step, you're just not going to get the results. Someone's going to get burned, if you don't do all of them. So clean it like you mean it. It's not half-baked science. So let's talk about storage too. It feels like that's kind of the forgotten middle child of endoscope reprocessing. So should we hang them vertically? Should we hang them horizontally? Do we need to get separate little condos for bronchoscopes and GI scopes? What are the biggest unknowns or inconsistencies in how we store the devices? How do those gaps impact patient safety?
And this is honestly a quite a big gap. And the appropriate storage of endoscopes remains a really controversial topic, and whether it's vertical or horizontal. And while some manufacturers really do specify that in their IFUs, many do not, leaving it to their facility, leaving it to their IP team to do a risk assessment to decide what is the most suitable storage method. How often are we reprocessing these scopes after they hang? Where can we actually place certain scopes? Are we placing our bronchoscopes next to our GI scopes? All of these things impact how we store our endoscopes. And storage is such a critical role in maintaining the integrity and safety of endoscopes once they were reprocessed. That is the key to keeping them clean, high level disinfected, or sterilized. Obviously, if they're sterilized, they're going to be stored in a different way, that it doesn't matter about horizontal or vertical as much as it does high level disinfection. But we really want each facility to follow the manufacturers. And if there's a gap in them, go ahead and look at guidelines and standards for additional information before you begin to conduct your risk assessment, because depending on your facility, your workflow is going to go ahead and impact your storage. How many scopes are you using? How often are you using them? How many cases or procedures are you having a day? All of these kind of factor in. So what I'm saying is there's not a great answer, and we definitely do need more research around it. So it doesn't always fall on that facility to do the heavy lifting to provide recommendations beyond those in our guidelines and standards.
So, if I was working in a facility that reprocesses scopes frequently, which of those questions do you think are the key questions to make sure that we're storing those scopes appropriately before this better evidence-based information comes out?
Yeah, I would have you pull, what are your current policies? What are your current protocols? Let's look to see what kind of foundation you're building upon, and let's see where that low-hanging fruit are. IPs, if you don't know a lot, you can always rely on your low-hanging fruit, what exactly you know, and then you can start to build upon that with more evidence. As we know, low-hanging fruit, there's a lot of evidence around there, guidelines and standards. You can improve them, build your trust with your endoscope reprocessing team as well, which is quite difficult, and then begin to look at other things. When it comes to storage, the one thing that I do always ask is, do you have a unidirectional flow for storage? Once you place that scope in storage, once it's taken out, is it immediately reprocessed, even if it's not used for a case or procedure? So begin looking at those policies and protocols, looking at the low-hanging fruit, and then begin climbing up that ladder for things that have more ambiguity that aren't outlined in the manufacturer's IFUs, those standards or guidelines, and then use IP chat or IP talk to go ahead and tap a few people to be like, hey, what are y'all doing? And then that way you can begin to tailor. Use IPs like a family. We're one big family and we're one big community. There are no secrets in infection prevention. And when you partner with IPs, you're partnering harder to go ahead and enhance the field.
Yeah, sharing is caring.
I'm so glad you're with us, Frankie. I'm so glad you're in our community.
I
Well,
know.
thank
You're
you.
our new bestie, by the way.
Oh, trust me, I
In
think
case you didn't know.
equally obsessed with y'all as you are with me.
So, obviously, through this conversation, it's crystal clear that there's a lot of inconsistencies in IFUs, and IPs know this. We know that IFUs are like, they're just the word I'm looking for.
The
Well,
thing
they're
of
either 2
nightmares.
pages long or they're 2,000 pages long, and
Right. And they're ambiguous, and
they are
point to other,
ambiguous, yes.
they point to other things, and it's just frustrating.
Yes.
But so they can compromise patient safety. So, in your view, Frankie, what is the most urgent research question that we need to answer next in the endoscope reprocessing space that would help us as IPs to keep patients safe?
So I'm a very firm advocate of this one, and it does kind of connect back to baking as well as, when you're looking at a recipe, it will say this takes 45 minutes. And I'm a very slow baker in general, so I'll just get that right out of the gate. But I want to say that what is generally understood is some endoscopes are more intricate designed than others, and it might involve more of a longer manual process, but what exactly is the time frame that we can expect? So how long should it take to manually clean some of these endoscopes? If we had certain time parameters to achieve what even IFUs say, especially when we think about high patient volume turnarounds or additional pressure to get a certain scope ready for a case or procedure. The lack of time parameters that aren't included in those IFUs could actually result in increased risk. So if you really wanted us to hit all those points, give us all those lovely details. As IPs, we get lost in the details, we get lost in the minutia. We love that because it helps keep us accountable and within compliance accordingly. And I think if we just had some more information about how long it takes to reprocess these scopes, according to the manufacturers, we could begin to move that needle as well.
Yeah, I love all of your baking comparisons because it's so true. Like if baking is chemistry, then reprocessing, it's microbiology with heat. If you miss a step, you don't just get a sunken cake, you get a contaminated scope. So yeah,
I
sorry, I didn't
truly
mean to.
love that.
I'm gonna just talk about I love this little analogy about
And
baking.
oftentimes we need to compare it to something so that way people can understand the gravity of it. I
Right,
always try to
right.
compare one thing to another of commonplace or like common experience. That way people will be like, I don't know anything about endoscopes, or you feel like you know it all. And you just need that comparison to be like, all right, have y'all missed baking soda versus baking powder when y'all done a
Mm-hmm.
cake? Yes, we have. And we have had unintended results that were like, what went wrong? And then you
Exactly.
read the
Right.
recipe over and then you're like, oh my
Right.
God, I did
Exactly.
not include the right ingredient or I didn't include it at the right time. You think you can freestyle, the only kind of freestyle, and people hear me say this all the time. I love freestyling on the dance floor, but that is the only place of freestyling.
Well, and
No
to your point,
freestyling and infection control.
No,
no, and to your point, having, the nice like list of like each step in your IFU of how to do things similarly to the steps in adding the ingredients in the baking makes a lot more sense because it is so hard with all of the steps that you have to do to just have that in your head. So, I mean, having that available to the folks that are actually doing that process
Mhm.
would help them to not miss those really critical steps in the process.
absolutely.
And I
Right.
kind of want to throw you a little bit of a curveball here and ask about delayed reprocessing and what your thoughts are on that. We see this happen sometimes where a scope is used and then, it doesn't make it back to the reprocessing location in, the correct amount of time. So, what are your
Mhm.
recommendations around delayed reprocessing or, you know, uh, tracking these particular scopes that end up in this situation?
I love a good curveball. And this is actually a pretty hot topic because if cleaning isn't started within that designated time, which is usually about 60 minutes, consult your IFUs again here. You actually have to look through the manufacturer's IFUs for delayed reprocessing instructions, which might require some additional soak time before some manual cleaning. You also need to ensure you're using the appropriate products to go ahead and soak that as well. This kind of opens Pandora's box in many sort of ways because some people will go ahead and soak it for a little bit longer. Some people will go ahead and soak it for a little bit shorter. Some people aren't even using a timer and they're just like, oh, we can roughly tell it's still been under an hour. So we just have many inconsistencies and variations. And going back to this love, I guess this is a baking episode at this point.
I was
And
gonna
it's
say,
called like
because then you're
baking
just gonna get a
hybrid.
gooey interior of the cake and it's not done because you just guessed at the time.
You guessed at the time. And we all know when we have baked, and I could all agree somebody has at least baked one thing once upon a time, even if it came out of a package and it's ready. When we have freestyled just a little bit, we're just like, hopefully, I hope it's fine. We should not be doing that with something reprocessable that is going to enter a new patient, and the patient is assuming everything is all great and it's clean and ready. We
Right.
want to we're paid to be paranoid and we want to make sure that every scope is as good as the next and that we're reducing any possibilities of transmission between patients. So the manufacturer's IFUs will very much help with this. And ideally, that delayed reprocessing, we're going to get more information out about that. I know that there's some research that just floated across my LinkedIn recently. I didn't click on it and read it in the depth that I want to, but there is more information coming out about this delayed reprocessing and what are the best steps to take. that basically help us decrease that bioburden and that stuff that's been hanging out in there for potentially too long.
Well, thank you.
Um, so before we let you go, what would you say to the IP or sterile processing tech who is listening right now and who is starting to feel overwhelmed by all the gaps? And they want to do the right thing because everybody does, but they don't know where to start.
I would recommend starting with, and this is a shameless plug, is APIC has a endoscope reprocessing issue brief that does highlight all of the key steps. So what's really great about this and what's really novel is we talk about the rationale for every single step and exactly what happens when you skip that. Are you going to get that gooey cake here? Are you going to go ahead and have some other kind of problem later on? Maybe it's a flat cake. Maybe it went ahead and it spilled over your pan. But for every key reprocessing step within endoscopes, we go ahead and we break it on down for you, including those controversial and uncertain topics. Instead of you scratching your head thinking, okay, am I even going to find this information? This is a really nice summary and wrap up of many things. As I said, page 24 is a high level summary of many things. If you want to at least go for a high level summary that is brand new and up to date, go ahead and check this out and then start following up with your manufacturers. Hey, there's ambiguity for X. Can you please put this on letterhead? Hey, there's ambiguity for Y. Can you help me? Begin to build those bridges. There are many unknowns out there, but at least knowing them could help you successfully say, hey, there's not a great answer. We're going to need to conduct a risk assessment. And then you're going to become a leader in the field. And if you want to do some research, holler at me.
Take that, Tex. Do it. Sorry. So, there's a few things that really stuck with me today. There's gaps in manufacturer guidance that often push reprocessing decisions to the frontline staff without clear evidence. So if you are one of those techs listening, keep that in mind. Drying isn't just a nice to do. It is mission critical to stopping microbial growth.
No
and no parties. We do not want your bring your own biofilm. And
No
we've got
VIP
a long way to go.
invitations.
Yeah, we have got a long way to go in standardizing storage to protect patient safety. Okay, so in both baking and reprocessing, you can't fix the end. Burnt cookies cannot be unburnt. You can't just sprinkle some alcohol on contaminated instruments and call it good.
Well said, Nikki. Yeah. And to everyone listening, don't forget that reporting safety issues and sharing what's not working is how we all get better. And back to what Frankie had mentioned before, the APIC IP chat or listserv is a fantastic place to network and find more information and share what you know. So Frankie, thank you so much for being here. Your work is pushing the field forward for sure. And it's also making us laugh along the way, which helps a lot.
Fun is always good.
We need fun.
We do need fun. Do you have any other last words for us, Frankie? What other baking analogies can we come up with?
My last tip is if you want to follow everything that I'm doing and whatnot, please go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people just to hear about what ideas you have. APIC doesn't stand without its members, and you're so important to us. So if you have any thoughts that have been rattling around in your brain for a while, please feel free to share me, and we can begin to create an echo chamber that maybe becomes a project later on in the future that begins to help us move the needle. Everything that you're experiencing at your facility is valid, so let's try to connect all the dots together to see how we can shift that landscape.
Love it. I love it. And to our listeners, stay dry, stay bristled, and always check your IFUs, but do not let them gaslight you. So see you next time on AGIC, Science into Practice. That's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today. We are Nikki Shore and Jesse Swain, and this is the American Journal of Infection Control podcast, Science into Practice. Thanks for listening and doing your part to prevent infection, because remember, infection prevention is everybody's business.
APIC Science into Practice is created by the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology with input from the APIC Center of Research, Practice, and Innovation, and Pat Stone and Jean Brandt at APIC and APIC staff, Rebecca Bartles, Ria Gupta, and Bobby Gulshan. We work in partnership with Human Factor and audio techs Blake Alton and Carolyn Schneer. To hear other APIC episodes and to access information about this podcast and the field of infection prevention and control, go to our website, ajicscienceintopractice.org. That's AJIC scienceintopractice.org.